Hi, and welcome back to Building Better Mentors. This is video number 5, Giving Feedback That Helps Teachers Grow. In our last video, we talked about supporting teachers through challenges. We looked at how mentors can listen, ask questions, help teachers identify possible solutions, and provide support without taking over and fixing the problems for them. Today we're going to talk about another important part of mentoring, giving feedback. Feedback can be one of the most valuable things a mentor provides, but it can also be one of the most uncomfortable. We may worry about hurting someone's feelings, creating tension in a relationship, or not knowing exactly what to say. But avoiding difficult feedback doesn't help a teacher grow. When feedback is thoughtful, specific, and focused on growth, it can help teachers recognize their strengths, understand areas where they can improve, and feel more confident in their practice. Before we talk about how to give effective feedback, let's talk about what feedback actually means. Feedback is information that helps someone understand how their actions or practices are affecting a situation and what they can do to either change or continue that practice. Feedback is not the same as criticism. Criticism often focuses on what someone did wrong. Effective feedback focuses on what happened, why it matters, and what the teacher might do next. For example, someone could say to a teacher, "You need to do a better job managing your classroom." Now, this is a very vague statement, and it doesn't give the teacher much information about what they really need to change. So instead, effective mentor could say, "I noticed that several children were losing focus and it led to some unwanted behaviors while they were waiting for the next activity. What do you think you might do to help keep them engaged during the transition?" That feedback is very specific and the teacher knows exactly what they need to focus on. One of the best ways to make feedback more supportive is to recognize what the teacher is already doing well. This doesn't mean giving someone a compliment just to make them feel better before giving them criticism. It means genuinely looking for strengths that can be built upon. You could say, "I noticed how calmly you responded when the child became upset. You gave them time to calm down instead of immediately stepping in." Then you can connect that strength to an area for growth. I wonder if you could use the same calm approach during transitions when the whole group is becoming frustrated. Now the feedback isn't simply saying, "Here's what you're doing wrong." It's helping the teacher recognize a skill they already have and consider how they might use it in another situation. Another important part of effective feedback is being specific. General feedback like "good job" or "you need to work on classroom management," that doesn't give the teacher enough information to learn from. Instead, try describing what you actually observe. For example, "I noticed that you got down on the child's eye level and spoke calmly when they became upset. They seemed to calm down once you did that." Or, "I noticed that you gave the children a warning before cleanup today, and the transition seemed to go more smoothly." Specific feedback helps teachers understand exactly what they did that was effective. It's also important to focus feedback on actions and behavior rather than someone's personality or character. Instead of saying, "You're impatient with the children," describe what you observe. "I noticed that your voice became louder when several children were talking during the activity." This gives the teacher something specific that they can reflect on and change. It also reduces the chance that the teacher will feel personally attacked. When we describe what we see and hear, rather than making assumptions about why somebody behaved in a certain way, we leave room for the teacher to reflect on what was happening. Maybe the teacher was feeling overwhelmed, maybe the activity wasn't going as planned, or maybe they weren't aware of how their response was coming across. The goal isn't to label the teacher or tell them what kind of person they are. The goal is to help them recognize a behavior and consider whether there is another way they could respond. Feedback doesn't have to be a one-way conversation where the mentor talks and the teacher just listens. In fact, some of the most effective feedback conversations involve asking and answering questions. You could start with, How do you think that went? What are you most proud of? Was there anything that didn't feel right? This gives the teacher an opportunity to reflect before you share your observations, and you may discover that they noticed the exact same thing you did, or they may have a perspective that you hadn't considered. After listening, you can add your own observations and work together to identify next steps. The timing of feedback conversations also matters. When possible, you should give feedback when the situation is still fresh in everyone's mind. If you observe something on Monday, but you don't talk about it till 3 weeks later, the teacher may not remember the situation clearly, and you might not either. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give feedback immediately after every interaction either. Sometimes a teacher needs time to settle down, or you may need time to think about what you want to say. You also want to consider whether the teacher is in a place where they can actually hear and process the feedback. If they're in the middle of a stressful situation or trying to manage the classroom, that may not be the best time for a coaching conversation. Instead, find a time when you can give the teacher your full attention and they can give you theirs. Of course, a teacher's day is quite busy and it's not always possible to get coverage in the classroom. You may need to have a quick conversation during nap time or while the children are engaged in free play. That is likely better than waiting for a time when you can both get away for a formal meeting. Sometimes the feedback we need to give isn't easy. Maybe you've noticed that a teacher frequently arrives late to the classroom. Maybe you're concerned about how they're interacting with children. Or maybe there's an important procedure that they aren't following. In these situations, it's especially important to be respectful and specific. You don't want to avoid the issue just because the conversation might be uncomfortable. You might be tempted to soften difficult feedback because you're afraid of hurting someone's feelings. You might use vague language, downplay the concern, or focus so much on the positive that the teacher isn't clear about what needs to change. Being supportive doesn't mean avoiding the issue or making it sound like it's not a big deal. Be honest about what you've observed while still treating the teacher with respect. You might say, I wanted to talk to you about something I've noticed. I've seen several times this week that you weren't in the classroom when the children arrived. Can we talk about what's been happening? This approach opens the door for a conversation rather than immediately making an assumption about why it's happening. Remember, if the issue involves job performance, safety, policy, or something that falls under supervision, it may be appropriate to involve a director or a supervisor rather than handling it with only a mentoring conversation. Now let's imagine you've observed a new teacher leading a small group activity. Several children are engaged, but 2 children begin talking to each other and moving away from the group. Afterwards, you could simply say, "You did a good job." But what does the teacher learn from that? Instead, you could ask, "How do you think that activity went?" And the teacher might say, "I think it went pretty well, but I lost the attention of 2 children toward the end." And you could respond, "I noticed that too. I also noticed that most of the children stayed engaged while you were asking questions. What do you think you could try next time to keep the other 2 children involved?" Now you're giving feedback, but you're also allowing the teacher to reflect and participate in deciding what to try next. The challenge for this video is to give one teacher specific, strength-based feedback. Start by identifying something you genuinely noticed the teacher doing well. Then be specific about what you observed and why it was effective. For example, I noticed that you gave the children a warning before cleanup today. That seemed to make the transition much smoother. Then, if appropriate, ask a question. Do you think that's something you could continue using? And afterwards, take a few minutes to reflect on the conversation. You can ask yourself, was the feedback specific? Did I focus on the teacher's actions rather than their personality? Did I give the teacher an opportunity to respond? Did the conversation leave them with something they could use going forward? Feedback doesn't have to be uncomfortable or critical to be useful. When we make feedback specific, respectful, and focused on growth, we can help teachers recognize what they're doing well and identify opportunities to continue developing their skills. The next video is the final video in our series. We'll bring everything together and talk about helping teachers grow and becoming a more intentional mentor. We'll look at how mentors can encourage professional growth, help teachers set goals, and continue developing their own mentoring skills. I'll see you there.